When Luca Romano left Brooklyn for a quiet Tuscan village to explore his grandmother's past, he expected history. What he found was Antonio. Tall, dark, and effortlessly magnetic, the local with the disarming smile quickly became impossible to ignore. What began as lingering glances over espresso at the village café soon turned into heated moments charged with undeniable tension. And as Luca wanders the town, uncovering layers of his family's heritage, he begins to suspect that some love stories don't just fade with time, they find their way back to life. Ciao miei amici, and welcome to Steamy Stories, the podcast where bromance turns bromosexual, written by JC Calciano. I'm your guest host, Josh, and today I am taking you to the charming village of San Fiori, where a young Brooklyn-born American travels to explore his Italian roots. Let's just say, the family tree he climbs bears some seriously succulent fruit. So grab a napkin, because your mouth is about to water for today's steamy story, the San Fiori Stud. The box wasn't large, but it was heavy with history. Luca Romano sat on the edge of his narrow Brooklyn bed, the late afternoon sun filtering through the slats of the blinds, but inking golden stripes across his bare chest and abs. The light caught the sheen of sweat clinging to his olive-toned skin, highlighting the curve of his biceps, the sharp cut of his jaw, and the subtle rise and fall of his chest as he breathed in the thick summer air. He wore only a pair of black boxer briefs that hugged his hips just right, the elastic low enough to tease the eye and hint at the strength beneath. His dark hair was a total mess, but sexy in that effortless, just-roll-out-of-bed way. Luca's lean, athletic frame bore the natural grace of someone who exercised with purpose, lifted for control, and meditated to calm a restless energy that stirred just beneath the surface. The room around him was small and cluttered, city life small, with stacks of old books, a half-packed suitcase, and a faint scent of espresso still lingering from his usual morning coffee ritual that he looked forward to all during the night before. His fingers, nimble and capable, hovered above the lid of the box resting on his thighs. He was old, walnut with brass hinges that had dulled with age. His thumb rubbed a groove worn smooth over decades. Inside were his known as treasures, waiting for him to be discovered. A bundle of brittle letters tied with a satin ribbon that had lost its color, a rosary missing one bead, and a black and white photograph of two people in love. Their faces were now blurred slightly with time. At the very top, folded like a secret, was a note in his grandfather's handwriting. Per trovare il mio cuore, vai a San Fiori. To find my heart, go to San Fiori. Her passing had been peaceful. She was 98 and lived a rich, wonderful life. Certainly one to be admired and envied. Her parting gift to her nephew was a modest inheritance. Not enough to change his life, but enough to open a door to the past, to a mystery she had never been able to solve. And now, a story she invited him to finish for her. Luca ran a hand through his hair and exhaled, his lips parting slightly as his gaze lifted toward the window. Dare he go to Italy like she suggested? Could he afford the time to familiarize himself with his lost family? What was in San Fiori that she wanted him to discover? He reached for his phone, opened a travel app, and decidedly booked a one-way plane ticket to Italy. Time to find out. Luca knew he hadn't any pressing appointments in the city, and besides, he needed a change. A change in what he didn't know. All he knew was that he was a single man alone in the big city with no direction to move in. Either professionally or romantically. What did he have to lose? A one-way trip to Italy sounded like a welcome escape from a life that had recently felt confined and restricted. The train from Aeroporto di Firenze in the northwest of Florence rocked gently as it curved through the countryside, making its way to San Fiore. When the quaint remote town of San Fiore came into view, It wasn't grand or cinematic. It was simple, quiet, the kind of place where time strolled instead of marched. Cobblestone lanes, stone cottages clinging to hillsides, a single bell tower rising above terracotta rooftops. Lucas stepped off the train with his satchel and suitcase, heart thudding, lungs filled with sun-warmed air and a scent of lavender and wood smoke. It felt like stepping into one of the stories she shared with him in his youth. The villa he'd rented was modest but charming. A whitewashed building at the edge of town with green shutters, a balcony overlooking the hills, an iron gate creaking with character. He dropped his bags, opened the windows, and let the air in. On the table, he spread the letters out one by one. Some were in English, most were in Italian, a few in dialects he could barely identify. Luca knew very little Italian, just the phrases Nona had taught him and a few more from the late-night U-Cube gramming sessions. But he had determination to track down the family history. Maybe a cousin, or perhaps someone who had known his grandmother before she came to America. Armed with little more than a photo of her, he started at the local church and inquired to whomever would stop and indulge his questions. Then the cemetery, the café. He carried the old photograph everywhere, asking, "Mia nonna, Francesco Romano, conoscete?" Sometimes he got a shrug, sometimes a polite smile. Once an old woman at the market waved her hand, scoffed, and murmured, "Americani pazzi," before disappearing down the aisle. Still, Luca pressed on, wandering the town, scribbling in his journal, watching the sun cast gold across the tiled roofs and dreaming about one day moving to this magical, wonderful place. Luca's mornings always began the same way. At a little cafe tucked on a cobbled street, where the scent of freshly ground coffee mingled with warm pastry and the sweetness of ripe fruit. The first sip of cappuccino, the flaky crunch of a croissant, the burst of citrus on his tongue. It was a quiet ritual, simple yet deeply satisfying, one he'd come to savor even more than his morning routine back in America. The cafe, near the old stone fountain in the heart of the piazza, was also where Luca first laid eyes on the man of his dreams. It was a quick sighting, but it definitely made an impression on Luca. The man stood in sandals on the worn cobblestones, sleeves rolled to his elbows, refilling a water jug from the steady trickle of water pouring from the fountain's nozzle. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with a lean, sculpted frame. His sunworm skin gleamed golden, and his thick, wavy hair, tied loosely at the neck, looked like it had been swept back by strong hands. He wore a crisp white linen shirt, open at the collar, and sheer enough to tease the muscles beneath, tucked into worn jeans that clung to his hips just right. Everything about him was raw, magnetic, and impossibly grounded, as if the land itself had shaped him from sun, sweat, and stone. And when he looked up, his eyes held Luca a moment too long. Luca couldn't look away, but he fought hard not to stare. He wanted an eyeful of this stud, as much as he could get, but didn't want to make it obvious the man was the object of his desire. Every morning while Luca sat at breakfast, the man refilled his water jug at the exact same time, but Luca wouldn't dare introduce himself. He was just too shy to approach someone so handsome, so imposing, so sexy. Then it finally happened. It was during the Saturday market in the Piazza San Fiori. Stalls piled with figs and olives, tables draped in lace and hand-painted tiles, the air humming with the gentle rhythm of Italian chatter and the song of espresso machines steaming hot milk. He'd almost walked past the little cart tucked in the corner where an old woman selling handmade jewelry showcased her homemade wares. Rustic beads, braided leather cords, charms shaped like vines, moons, and coins. But it was the pendant that stopped him. A single sunflower, carved of brass and inlaid with brilliant yellow and green enamel, hung on a thin gold chain. Its yellow petals alive with color caught the eternal bloom of this magical flower. Luca reached for it. So did someone else. Their hands brushed, warm skin against skin, and Luca looked up into the eyes he'd seen from afar all week. The man from the café who filled the jugs of water from the fountain. He stood close now, and Luca felt the pull between them shift into something magnetic. His voice, when it came, was smooth, low, and laced with a soft Italian accent. "Scusa," the man said, pulling his hand back with a smile as he motioned toward the pendant. "It was for my sister, her birthday." Luca hesitated. No, it's okay, I didn't know." The man studied him for a beat, then nodded at the delicate necklace. "You should take it." "I can't. If it's for your sister," Luca insisted as his heart began to beat wildly in his chest. "She'd probably lose it," he chuckled. "She loses everything. I'll find it another gift." Luca laughed and decided to accept the stranger's generous gesture as he grasped the small, intricate pendant and placed it firmly in his grasp. "Thank you." The woman behind the cart took the pendant from his hand and wrapped it in a small paper envelope. Luca tucked it gently into his pocket, still watching the man, still trying to think of something, anything to say. "I'm Luca," he offered finally. The man held out a hand, strong and confident. "Antonio." Luca took it. They shook hands. The imposing stranger had a firm yet inviting grip. "Would you," Luca started faltering, would you want to get a coffee or something, sometime?" Antonio smiled, his eyes thoughtful. "I knew a place. Come." They walked down the piazza, the conversation shy and awkward at first, but engaged and steady. Antonio led them to a small café tucked behind a wall of vines, where they sat at a table in the shade under a canopy of bougainvillea. Antonio ordered 2 coffees from barista with a wave of his hand. Soon, Luca found himself sipping steaming espresso so strong it made his toes curl. Antonio wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, Luca listened. He learned that Antonio worked on his family's sunflower farm just outside of town, that his father had grown up here but never talked much about the past. "My Nonna came from this town 80 years ago," Luca said, pulling out his wallet and showing Antonio the photo he carried of her. "She left San Fiori during the war, moved to America. She used to tell me stories, but they always ended the same way. 'Some hearts stay behind,' she'd say. She had this laugh that made you feel like home. Her name was Francesca Romano." Antonio froze. Luca noticed. Antonio shook his head slowly, gaze narrowing. "That name. I've heard it before." Luca's pulse quickened. "My Nonna kept everything, letters, photos, all of it. You want to come back to the villa? He hesitated, suddenly nervous. Antonio didn't ask questions. He just nodded. The villa was warm and golden with late afternoon light pouring through the windows. Luca led Antonio inside, past the rustic kitchen, into the open living space where his grandmother's letters lay spread out across a table like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be solved. "These," Luca said, lifting a bundle tied with a faded red ribbon. "She kept them her whole life. I didn't think much of them until I read this." He handed Antonio a letter. Antonio held it gently, reverently, his thumb brushing the fragile paper. His brow furrowed as he read the signature at the bottom. "Gabriele Bellini," he said aloud. His voice was barely above a whisper. "That name mean anything to you?" Luca asked, heart in his throat. Antonio looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. "That was my father." Silence filled the room. Luca stepped closer. "But he had this photo. And once, just once, he said he'd loved the girl who left. Said she never came back, but he never stopped waiting." Luca swallowed hard. "She planned to, but someone in the family got sick, and by the time she could return, it was too late." Their eyes met, and in that moment, The past wrapped itself around the present, pulling the two men closer like an invisible thread finely drawn tight. Luca smiled softly. There's a phrase I heard once here in Italy. Solo le montagne non si incontrano. Only the mountains don't meet. Antonio's lips curved, something bittersweet behind his eyes. Then maybe we were meant to. Luca reached for his hand, slowly, giving time to pull away, but Antonio didn't. Just the opposite, in fact. He stepped forward, lacing their hands. Then his palm found Luca's chest, resting flat over his heart, as if confirming that this was real. Their kiss was a slow collision of breath and longing. Antonio's lips were soft, tasting of espresso, something earthier, warmer. The kiss deepened, and suddenly the quiet villa wasn't so quiet anymore. Clothes loosened, fingertips explored. They moved as if they already knew the map of each other's bodies, as if something in their souls had always been waiting for this night. Antonio lifted Luca onto the edge of the table. Let us flutter into the floor around them like blessings. Antonio could feel Luca's shallow breath warm on his ears as he whispered from behind. This just feels so right, like I've known you my whole life. I guess love knows no generation, Antonio groaned as he turned and dropped to his knees before Luca. Antonio smirked as he looked up at him, unfastening his belt. We can have what our grandparents were not able to. Luca gasped at the firm yet gentle grasp of Antonio's hands. If your grandfather was anything like you, I could see why my Nona dreamt of him every night. Antonio stopped, looked deeply in Luca's eyes, and stated teasingly, You Americans have never experienced anything like an Italian lover. Trust me, you're in for a treat. Luca couldn't reply as Antonio worked busily on putting a happy ending to this newly forged fairy tale romance. Amore. The only thing better than being with family is creating your own. Luca and Antonio were destined to find love, just like their ancestors before them. I hope you enjoyed today's Steamy Stories. Traveling to beautiful, faraway lands is one of our favorite things to do. Who knows where I'll take you next time? But for now, I must say arrivederci, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell your chosen family about our humble little podcast. Ciao miei amici.